Hello, hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Not D&D. Today, we are going to be sailing across the Aegean Sea, and leading the ship and steering the way for us, we have Stu Goff here to talk about it with us. Thanks for joining.
Hi, thanks for having me on the show.
Absolutely. Well, I'm really excited to talk to you about your game, Aegean, so mythic role-playing. So it's incredibly thematic, and I love the setting. I loved, I studied classics in school, so this was a particular part of history that really interested me. So I'm really excited to talk to you about the game. But before we do that, I'd like to talk about you as a designer and a creator, your background and history of games. So the classic starting question I have is, do you remember your first gaming experience? Do you remember the first tabletop RPG that you played?
So I do. So it started really with the fighting fantasy game books, and I think that's probably the case for anyone growing up in the UK. So I never finished Warlock of Firetop Mountain, but the first I finished was Citadel of Doom. So yeah, so that kind of got me interested, and I'd moved to a new school, and a friend was a complete stranger at the time, but someone there who has become a lifelong friend. He saw me playing it, like reading these game books during lunch, and he said, "Oh well, we're doing this other thing, and it's sort of similar." And it was Tunnels and Trolls, and we made characters, and we never played. Never actually got it to the table.
Okay.
So my first actual RPG experience ended up being the D&D Red Box, which is, again, probably if you're growing up in the UK in the 80s, it was probably your first experience. So that's where it kind of got started. But back then, we were quite lucky. I grew up in Norwich, and there's an amazing shop. It's still there, the Games Room on Elm Hill, which has loads of RPGs and tabletop war games and board games and all sorts. So we had the opportunity to pick up and play a lot of other stuff. So nice. I mean, we did a lot of TMNT Golden Heroes. That was a lot of fun. Pendragon from early on as well, and then moving on into Vampire, which was a bit more adult, but like getting into the 90s, that was that was kind of, it came out at the perfect time as I was entering my goth phase, and it was spot on.
Okay, nice. That's perfect. That's great that you had I think that really highlights the importance of local game stores and what they can do for indie gaming communities and giving you exposure to different games and things. Because having someone's like, "Oh, you like this? Have you tried this?" and stuff. So I love local game stores and board game cafes for what they do for RPGs. But it sounds like you had your early diet of RPGs was really varied. How has that translated into you creating games? Like, when did you start making them? And do you think having that variety of different systems has influenced how you make games?
Oh, it definitely has. Yeah. I mean, I can kind of look at Aegean and I can go, oh, well, I got that from there, and I got that mechanic from this other game, and there's probably some stuff in there which is original, but a lot of the time when I look at it, it feels like a mishmash of games that I've loved rather than something that I created out of nothing. You know, it definitely came from a lot of influences, and I think I didn't really get started, so I had quite a sort of break from role playing in my 20s and sort of early 30s, and it was only sort of mid 30s that I really got back into it again. Through my girlfriend and a lot of her LARP friends. So again, we started playing lots of different and various games, and they all kind of merged into game design for me. But we were playing Pendragon at the time, and I do love the game. It's got some amazing systems to it, but it also becomes kind of like Spreadsheet, the role-playing game. Like if you've ever keeping up with your families and everything, it can become very involved. So I kind of wanted to get some of the good bits of that, but without kind of but making it simpler and
without the admin.
Don't want it to become a job in itself. So that's kind of where I got started, and it was that Aegean really came out of that. It came out of that Pendragon campaign. Mechanically, it's not very like Pendragon at all, but it has some of the aspects in that you've got the city management, which you can kind of get to in Pendragon in your kind of your mana and stuff. So that was kind of where the ideas came from. The setting, I did classics at school as well, and
proper nerds,
proper nerds,
yeah.
And it didn't really feel like there were any good Greek myth RPGs around at the time. There were, as I was working, things came out. Aegon came out, and there were quite a lot of D&D supplements for Greek myth or kind of Greek myth related.
Yeah, sure.
But they never really felt, they felt like a skin rather than like the meat of the game.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because you can force D&D into any kind of setting, of course, but
yeah,
it's so much nicer if you have systems and a mechanic that supports the setting a lot more. So,
which is really what I wanted to do. Yeah, I really wanted to take that thing which wasn't being done very much and kind of do it my way, but make the mechanics support the theme as well.
Nice. So how long have you been working on Aegean for? It was successfully crowdfunded late 2021, but how long was the idea to the making it, to getting it out there on Kickstarter?
It was probably about 2015, 2016 when I first started looking at it. Yeah. So there was quite a sort of development process. And originally it wasn't going to be Greek myth. It was, in fact, actually the original stuff, even mechanic wise, is quite different. So it kind of, it has the germs there, but it developed quite a bit into it. And the first thing I released was quick start rules, which were 100 pages, so not very quick. A big chunk of that is a scenario, but it's a 4-part scenario. But I ended up putting a lot of things went into that. Everything apart from character generation, really, from the core book. So that was my first thing, and I was kind of I got it printed very cheaply, and I was sort of trying to sell it, and it was a bit not very focused. And then that grew in. I did a supplement for that as well. So again, still didn't have character generation, but I had a book of adventures for it, which still sells very well, and I've still got copies of that. And then it was after that I was sort of thinking, well, actually, what do I want this to become? It can't just be these 2 books which don't have everything that you need to play. It needs a bit more, and that's when I kind of really started working on getting the core book out, and that was. It was probably about 60% written by the time I went to the Kickstarter. So a lot of it was there, but not. So a lot of the core ideas were all there, but not the actual all of the writing. So it was quite a long process, really, for the first one. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think it's good you had a lot of it done and the quick start ready for the crowdfunding, because I think then for people, they can download it and take a look and see what it's about to before committing to it. Which makes perfect sense. So let's get into talking about the game a little bit now, because like you said, it successfully crowdfunded in late 2021, and so it exists. It's out there in the world now. So if you go to aegeanrpg.com, you can find ways to get your greasy mitts on it and get a copy for yourself while we're talking. But yeah, let's talk about the game and what it is. So obviously Greek mythological setting, but let's talk about the setting and the world a little bit. If you could draw us into what this game is looking at.
Okay, so the thing that's been very difficult about the setting for me has been trying to kind of I much prefer mythology. Mythology is kind of, you can be less precise with it. You don't need to research quite so much. But I kind of still wanted to get that kind of classical period as well, and a lot of because that's when a lot of the stories were written down. But also that's what people think of. You think of the bronze breastplate and the bronze helm, and it would be a bit like trying to do that with, that's my favorite of all of the artwork. That is my favorite. But trying to do the period when the myths kind of were first sort of talked about in a sort of oral tradition is culturally really, really different from the classical period. So I kind of wanted, from the beginning, I wanted it to look like how people would think of classical Greece, but I really wanted to focus on the myths. So it was a kind of a sort of emerging process of trying to squish this sort of historical period and this mythological period in together. And I knew from that, particularly from the historical kind of period, I really wanted the city management to be key. So I didn't want it to just be, I mean, it absolutely can be just adventurers running off and fighting monsters and sailing the Aegean Sea and all the rest. But I kind of wanted to get something which kind of grounded it a bit as well. So I kind of wanted to put the classical and the mythological together, and that's where the sort of city rules sort of started taking shape.
Nice. And talking about the mechanics, we kind of briefly said, so the core resolution is a D10 dice pool, which I love a dice pool system myself. But could you talk a little bit more about why you chose that and what the kind of design philosophy was when you were approaching the game?
So originally, I was playing quite a bit of Star Wars around the time, the FFG, the funky dice system. And I kind of wanted, I really quite I like that a lot. It's great a lot of the time, but sometimes you just want a simple dice roll and you don't want to be figuring out advantages and things. So initially it started off as a kind of opposed dice pool. So you'd have different colored dice and you would roll your difficulty dice as a complete pool. And I was trying to get the D8, D10, D6 all kind of involved, and you would have different sort of upgrades, but it became so complicated writing that down that I really wanted to simplify it. And that then became pretty much the vampire system. I mean, that was obviously a heavy influence on having a D10 dice pool. Yeah. But there was no point where I didn't want a dice pool, though. I really like dice pools. I like if you're not very good at something and you pick up 2 dice and you can feel that you've only got 2 dice in your hands, you know you're not very good. And if you pick up 8 dice and you go, yeah, actually, this is going to be good, isn't it? And so I really like that sort of visceral kind of feeling to dice pools. So it was always going to be dice pools, but it didn't start off as D10s. That took a little bit of trying to do something complex and not wanting something complex, and then trying to just sort of chip away until it was something a lot simpler.
One of the things I liked reading through kind of the rules is the D10 dice pool, like success on an 8+, it gives you a system that's kind of built for success. It's trying to encourage you to do the thing, but the game has a nice thing where, yes, you can do the thing, but there's like a cost or a risk. Could you talk a little bit about your ideas around that and how that plays out in the game?
Yeah, so I kind of wanted something where you could always succeed if you were prepared to pay the price. So I mean, if you're good at something and you're rolling a bucket full of dice, you've got a good chance of success. Yeah. But in those moments when maybe you're doing something that's a bit more dangerous and you may not be quite as good at it, I still wanted to give the player the option to succeed. So you can, your 10s count as extra bonuses, and you can also save them for later. So there's a resolve mechanic which lets you store that 10. And then you can spend it to gain a success in a future thing. So you can, if you're doing stuff you're good at early on in a session, then you're potentially kind of waiting, or you're giving yourself potential bonuses for future stuff where you might not be quite so good. But I also wanted, even without any of that, I wanted the player to be able to succeed. So you can gain risk. Risk is sort of like hit points. But you can gain risk to gain a success. So you can sort of injure yourself to gain a success. You can even, so if your risk goes too high, you become vulnerable and you start taking proper damage. You could even effectively kill your character by succeeding if you really wanted to, because you could take a wound instead of taking risk. So I wanted that to be an option, always wanted that to be an option, but I wanted it to be up to the player. So the player can do crazy things if they want. They can take the most dangerous leap off a cliff and still succeed if that's what they really want to do.
It gives you the opportunity to have the heroic sacrifice moment as well. And I did the thing that saved the world, but it cost me, my life. But sometimes in a role-playing game, that's the cool thing you want to do with your character. That's the moment. And in this setting, it makes perfect sense as well.
And that's where good stories come from. That's you'll be talking about that afterwards, definitely, if that's what you do.
See, speaking about characters, let's have a chat about the characters we'll be playing in the game. So, who will we be when we sit down to play this game?
So this is where some of the classical stuff kind of comes back into it. So you can play your heroic adventurers. They're of kind of many stripes. It's kind of a bit weighted towards warrior kind of archetypes rather than kind of magicians, just because that tends to be what the myths are about. It's normally about the heroic warriors rather than. But I still wanted to keep options available for that for players. But I mean, the core thing is there's a career system. There are, I think there's 8. I don't know, actually, 8 or 9 careers that you can have to start off with, and they kind of, you can take multiple careers, so you can always, so you could be a soldier and a scholar, and that's fine. They don't necessarily gel particularly well together. Some careers work better together than others. So like wrestler is very good at unarmed combat because you go to the games and you want to fight, and but they work very well with athlete because athletes also want to go to the games, but they have a slightly different focus. So I wanted to get all of the classical kind of things in there. So scholar is a big one. Citizen, which is a bit of an all-rounder, is very much about it sort of gels well with other careers, but it's very, very good for dealing with city-related stuff because that's their focus. But all of these things sort of work nicely together, but they're very, very classical kind of citizen of ancient Greece kind of focus rather than more so than they are your wandering random adventurer. There is a sort of magic system available. It's a bit hard to get into, but that's more around mystery cults, which are again very much from the classical period. It's very much you join a specific cult of a god, and you can gain slightly supernatural powers that way. But mostly, it tends to focus on warriors and people of the city.
Right. So we are like mortals, or we can be like demigods, like the sons of daughters of summer gods and things like that as well.
Yeah. So children of the gods is definitely an option for play.
Fun. So when we are building a character, like I've got some character sheets on the screen for people that are watching, but obviously there's some people listening to the podcast. But what goes into character creation? Like how long does it take? And if we could talk a little bit about some of the key areas as well, because I know there's like risk, endurance, glory, and hubris and all those elements. So how long does character creation take, would you say?
It's a bit more involved than I would like. If I was to do a second edition, I would quite like to streamline it a bit. But you've got a kind of step process, and you've got a certain number of points to spend, which is I keep thinking it's 15. I told one group it was 15, and I was surprised at how overpowered they were. But no, it's 10 points.
It's
10 points. Yeah, 10 points you get to spend. You've got a few different options. So the cheapest option would be you're immortal. You've got sort of baseline stats, and you always get to pick a career, and you come from a fairly sort of common background, like a hunter or a herder or something. You can also have options where, so rather than playing a mortal character, you can play the child of a god, god or goddess. And there are a few different options there, and that gives you like increased endurance. You start off with glory as well, because people talk about you because they your heritage is sort of at least known to some extent. Your background covers, you're essentially your parents and your upbringing. So you can play a noble. You can be from a very wealthy family all the way down to a criminal with very little standing and very little sort of money. And obviously, noble with all of its benefits costs more than it does to be from a criminal background. There are different packages for your characteristics. So there's a kind of legendary, which gives you far more points to spend, and down to a just sort of baseline of 2 for each. If you're the child of a god, that will give you a bonus to one of your characteristics, as well as a gift, which tend to be quite rarely used, but quite potent in what they do. So you have a sort of a bit of an advantage. No, it all balances out. Hopefully it all balances out. But you have a sort of a key area where you will have an advantage over other players. And that sort of, they vary a bit from things like robust, which just means you're resistant to poisons and things like that, to abundant catch. If you're the child of Poseidon, you can your city will always have fishing resources coming in because Poseidon likes that. He favors you.
Sure.
And then you've got choice of career. everyone gets a free one. You can take multiple careers at character generation. You can bump up your skills, and you can also advantages and disadvantages, which are things like you might begin the game having already won one of the Pan-Hellenic games, like the Olympics or something like that, or you may have trained with the Centaur Chiron, and you've got superior skills because of that. Down to the favour and disfavour of the gods, which is something you can also earn in play as well as taking at the beginning.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about favour and disfavour because I want to talk widely about the role of the gods in the game, because it's Greek mythology, and in those classic stories, gods walked among mortals and like interacted with them and did things. So this is clearly very much the case in this setting. So mechanically, how does favour and disfavour work with your character sheet?
So each god has a set of 3 skills that they are kind of they're part of their domain. So Artemis has accuracy for shooting bows and survival, and I can't think of the other one. But each god has 3. Yeah. If you have the favour of the god, then once per session, if you're rolling one of those skills, you can choose to re-roll all of your failed dice. So
nice.
Yeah, so you've got your dice pool, you've got, I don't know, 8 dice, and you've only got 1 success, and that's not quite enough. And well, Artemis favours me, so I'll re-roll these 7 that have failed, and actually suddenly it's looking quite good. And you or the GM might describe it as Artemis kind of nudging your arrow into the correct path or something. Disfavour works the other way, so all of your successes get re-rolled. The thing with disfavour is because, see, as the player, you probably don't want to roll that. You can absolutely choose to use it because it's a once per session thing, and it can be quite good to get it out of the way and get it done. But if you don't, the GM can also say, well, you've got the disfavour of Artemis, and your arrow, it looks like it's going straight on target, and then you just see her nudge it out of the way, and you're re-rolling all of your fails. Re-rolling all of your successes.
Got it. So once per session, the GM could put that on you, or you as a player do have agency, say, I'm going to do it now and get it out of the way.
Yeah, okay. Let's get it done. Yeah. You can refuse it as well. But if you refuse to if you refuse the GM asking you to use your disfavour, you have to gain a point of hubris. Because
what does hubris do?
Hubris is very bad. It's not. It's when you. It can come into play sort of mechanically in a few different ways, but it's also the GM can just give you hubris if your character is behaving in a way which seems like it would offend the gods, which can be quite often because the gods take offence at a lot of things. Yeah.
Yes, they're very sensitive.
Mechanically, it comes in a few different ways. So, like you can refuse a disfavour roll, and you gain a point of hubris. At the end of a session, if you've got resolve left over, so when you roll 10s, you can store them as resolve and spend them later. If you've got any left over, well, you've kind of squandered the gift from the gods, and you gain hubris for that as well. So, like all of any resolve you've saved up, you kind of need to spend it just because, it's not so good to store it. Hubris then mechanically kind of ties in with glory. So if your character has a high glory, then obviously the gods they quite like that. Even if your hubris is getting high, you're still out there doing glorious things, and the gods are keen on that sort of thing. So while your glory is equal to your hubris or higher, your character can't die. If your character is so if your character is killed in anything, then the gods, they kind of intervene. They stop you from crossing over into Hades, and they bring you back. I mean, it's not immediate. You do have to go through a downtime, and so it's not you're invulnerable. But the gods kind of they're keen to keep you around. You're doing exciting and interesting things. If your hubris is higher than your glory, then that changes. They don't bring you back, and now your character can actually die if they suffer too many wounds. And you also get cursed. There's a nice curse table for
lovely.
For rolling to see what effects you might happen. They can be quite mild. They can also be quite severe. So it's quite varied. It's quite random as well. So you want to keep your hubris down.
Okay, keeping the hubris down. Got it. So you mentioned they're like being invulnerable and like getting wounds and things. So I think I'll move us into talking about warfare and monsters that we fight. So Greek mythology has so many great monsters and beasts and things. There's so much in the mythology. Could you walk us through some of the kind of monsters or adversaries that you'd encounter in the game?
Yeah, so there's and the book has a lot of stat blocks for humans, fairly ordinary humans, like various different roles from priests and various different soldier types and bandits, performers, and all sorts that you would expect. There's also there's rules for creating wild folk from those templates as well. So if you want a centaur who is also a hunter, then there's a kind of you add certain bits to the stat block, and the same for fawns and all sorts. There are also plenty of animal stat blocks as well, because most of the myths are, I mean, it's stealing cattle and hunting bulls and all sorts, and boars and things. But then there are a few of your sort of classic Greek monsters, such as Hydra, harpies are in there. I can't remember what else. There's a few. There are griffins and sphinx and various things. They operate pretty similarly to characters, so they have the same kind of stats and skills and everything, and sort of special abilities for. I can't think of any, but for flying and whatnot. So that's all kind of in the core book. There's a special ability which the scholar has, and which, like if you're part of the cult of Hecate, you can gain as well, which is arcane lore. So some of the monsters have an arcane lore description. So you can, if you've got the talent, you can craft something out of the monsters you've hunted. So you can, I don't know, use the feathers from a harpy to create better arrows and things like that.
Nice. Okay, cool. So we can be like running around the world exploring that. How does combat and warfare work? Because on the character sheet you mentioned there's different ways you can get wounds and things like that. And I know in defense there's like armor, shields, parry, and things like that. So what does combat look like?
So combat is a skill check. It's generally with accuracy, fight, or brawl. Not fight, melee and brawl. Usually using the might characteristic, but some weapons let you use different characteristics, like insight is good with bow. Some swords can have reflexes rather than might. Combat so initiative works a bit differently to most games. So there's generally no rolling for initiative. Well, you as a fallback you can roll for initiative, but if there's a character who has said they're about to do something, you don't just sort of stop, roll initiative, and then see if they act first. They just act first. If they succeed on their action, they get to pick who goes next.
Okay. So it's like a teamwork thing. So you can be a bit strategic about, nice.
Yeah, so as long as you keep succeeding, you can keep choosing who goes next. You may not want to, I mean, it can be beneficial to have all of the PCs go first, but sometimes you might want to keep one of the PCs at the end. If you fail a skill check, you don't succeed at what you're doing, then the decision goes to the GM, and the GM gets to pick who goes next. And the same if the NPC fails, the choice then goes back to the players. So it's a sort of it's quite strategic in that you want to know, you want to set up certain characters to do certain things, but you do want to keep a PC at the end, because they get to pick who goes at the beginning of the next round, which can also be them. And you don't really want NPCs doing that, because the GM can kind of be mean and pick more NPCs to go first. So that's initiative. Combat is generally it's a skill check. You get an action and a maneuver is moving around. It generally uses kind of fairly loose range bands rather than like miniatures or anything. So
so we're not measuring out things in this. It's more like it's far, it's close, or
I find that it's just a lot easier to deal with, especially if you're playing online. And I don't want to worry about moving miniatures around or anything like that.
Sure.
When you make an attack, you roll your skill. Your opponent might have a shield or parry or other. There are also dodge defense for animals and various monsters. That reduces your dice pool. So a large shield might take 3 dice out of your dice pool before you even roll.
Okay.
And if you succeed, your damage is based on your weapon. Add your total number of successes, and then subtract your opponent's armor, and that all goes onto someone's risk, so it increases their risk. When your risk goes above your endurance, that's when you get into trouble. That's when you have to take a wound instead.
Oh, okay.
Which is so wounds are, it's a D10 plus all of the value of wounds that you've got which haven't been first aided. So 1 wound is probably okay. That's you start getting a lot, then that D10 roll suddenly it's it's D10 plus 5 is suddenly a bit of a risk. If you roll a total of, I think it's 15 or 16, then that is, character is dead. If your hubris is higher than your glory, So that's a mortal wound. So the more the wounds kind of stack, 1 is probably fine, but lots of wounds starts becoming a problem.
Interesting. I like that. I really like that approach on initiative that you mentioned as well. I'm still thinking about that because I think, like you say, it makes it more strategic gameplay. So opposed to just who's got the highest dexterity score. I really like that. Yeah. Another aspect of the game is, as well as obviously combat and things like that being mighty heroes, we've got the city management aspects of the game. So how does that work?
So the city, you create a city as part of character generation as well, and the city has a character sheet too. This is another process that if I was doing a second edition, I'd probably streamline a bit. I think it's maybe I let it get away with itself, and it's maybe a bit more complicated than I would like. It's not quite spreadsheet level of complication, but it's still, I think it could be simplified.
Well, I'm looking at one sheet right now, which is nice, because for some city management things, there's already a lot more than that. So the fact it's all on one page looks nice.
That is a good start. So cities work in quite a similar way to characters. They have characteristics and they have skill. Well, no, they have characteristics. They're different characteristics to what your PC would have. So they have like military, culture, trade, and things. And they, rather than being sort of built directly, they're built by the items you add or the structures you add to your city. So if you have an agora is a kind of, every city starts with one because it's a kind of main sort of market and trading street. And that gives you a point in trade. If you gain a farm, that gives you a point in produce because your farm is creating food to feed your city. So like each structure sort of adds different things, and you can do things like train soldiers, and you gain points in military and that kind of thing.
Sure. The
city has an archon. The archon is there's a few different archetypes for them. They're sort of nominally in charge. So while the city is mostly a democracy and there's a council and everything, there's one person who's kind of in charge. And you use the archon skills for any city role. So you might roll like the archon's produce and I can't remember which one. I think it's probably survival to generate food at the end of a downtime. You can your archon skills tend to be a bit rubbish and they don't improve, but your character there's a kind of a phase of becoming a councillor, becoming a member of that council, and you take on a single characteristic of the city. So your character might be in charge of culture for the next season. In which case, any skill rolls relating to culture, you can use your skills instead of the archon skills. So your character skills, obviously, they improve over time. They get XP, and you can kind of focus on things that you would want to be good at in the council. So you get a better chance of succeeding at those things. That's the kind of that's sort of the key part of it. And then as part of that, you can choose what the some of you get a city action, so you can choose to build something, or it might be to go and create a new trade route with a neighbouring city, or things like that. You can do other stuff. You can build a statue in your own glory, and you can divert funds from the city to your own pocket, and
Sure.
yeah, it doesn't have to be all on the level. But yeah, that kind of adds a whole extra sort of set of connections, because all of your heroes come from the same city. They're all involved in this place. They all have a vested interest in making this place better.
Nice. I really like that. And like you say, it kind of grounds the story in a place and in a setting, and gives people some connection with the world. And I guess it's really nice to thread in stories and plot points and things, because like you say, it's like, oh, your city's under attack by this beast, so you want to go deal with it for that reason. So it's really nice to seed in plots and stories and things. Although, of course, as you mentioned, you do have lots of adventures already written and ready to go, so people don't have to, make something up by themselves. It's all kind of there. Well, that's so interesting. I mean, as I've mentioned before, the game was crowdfunded previously and is out there and available for people to buy at aegeanrpg.com. What are your future plans for the game?
So the original Kickstarter, I mean, the Kickstarter kind of got away with me. This is a kind of a theme of my life. I have a plan of what I'm doing, and then I get excited about something and it goes a bit further. So the Kickstarter was originally for the core book. And we ended up making about 14,000, which was way, like far more than I was expecting. And as part of that, as part of the stretch goals, ended up doing a lot of these things were quite nice. Then, I did them because they're nice to have. So I've got an all rolled up with Aegean, but they've all sold out since the Kickstarter. They've all gone. There were dice trays, there were dice, and GM screens. So all sort of really, really useful stuff. And they're relatively easy to produce on the back of also writing the game. I also went and did two other books as well. So there's the Book of Heroes, which is around 200 pages. It's a guide to the underworld and a series of adventures. So it's 5 kind of epic quests, fighting giant crabs and all sorts, and resolving disputes between centaur tribes, and lots of lovely mythical stuff. Then there was the Book of Empires, which is city guide to Crete and Troy and a Trojan War campaign, and then historical campaign around the Greek and Persian wars. So so that's got a lot of fighting, a lot of choosing sides and all sorts. So they came out of the Kickstarter. I'm now planning. In fact, it'll be running right now, is a new Kickstarter for a third supplement, which is the Isle of Pelops. So originally I was planning, because the name so far, Book of Heroes, Book of Empires, I was going to do Book of Cities. But all of the cities that were written about were all in the south. So they're all in the Peloponnese. And there was a lot around, for those who don't know, Pelops is the person who gave his name to the Peloponnese, so the Peloponnesos, and he was a early hero on the west coast. Who his kind of line, his children ended up being like most of the rulers of most of the cities. So a lot of that became the focus, because there's a lot of mythology around that, and so it was going to be the Book of Cities, and it ended up being just focused on the Peloponnese. So it's going to be a city guide. I think it's got Sparta, Mycenae, Olympia. It'll have Messenia as well. So it'll be all of the kind of the well-known places there, and it's going to have an adventure to support that, to take you to all of those places. And again, I like to have a lot of stuff written pre-Kickstarter. So that's about 60% written. I've still got an adventure to write and bits to finish, but it's sort of getting there. Nice. After that, I've got plans. So the plans change. My original plan was Book of Cities, Book of Sanctuaries, and then a Book of Voyages. Book of Sanctuaries is going to be kind of tied in with the Book of Cities. So there will be Epidaurus, which is the Sanctuary of Asclepios in the Peloponnese. That's going to be in the next book. I will probably do a sort of central Greece, so covering Athens and Corinth and Delphi. So that'll probably be after that. I do still want to do a book of voyages, because I think that would, like, Jason and the Argonauts would be a kind of great thing to play through.
Yeah.
So my sort of vague idea, which will probably change before I get to it, is to replace the city with your ship and your crew, and have them as
nice.
key parts. But like that's not written down anywhere. That's still just in my head. But those are the plans. So having the core book, 2 supplements, the original adventures book has been great, and doing another book is great. I still have ideas for more things, so
very exciting.
They might change, but they're still coming along. Oh, and actually, the newspaper I did for Tabletop Scotland, I did an adventure in a newspaper format. So it's Terror at Aspis. It's a sort of 4-page, just looks like a newspaper. It's got maps on the inside and everything that players can need is on the front or on the back. GM stuff is all in the middle. I kind of want to do another one of those as well, because that's it's a bit gimmicky, but it's a really quite nice format to get an adventure in. So nice. I've got lots of ideas for what I want to do next with it.
Perfect. But for now, live on Kickstarter, we have the Isle of Pelops that people can check out and look. Is the core rulebook available there if people can get like both if they haven't?
Yeah, it's an add-on. It's an add-on for that as well. Yeah.
Fab. Well, there you go. Well, if any of this has been interesting to you listening or watching, you can go check out the crowdfunding campaign, because the best way to support indie tabletop creators is to buy their stuff. But yeah. Stu, thank you so much for coming on and talking about Aegean with us and sharing the game. All the best for the Kickstarter campaign. Hope it goes super, super well for you. Before you go, I would like to ask you if you have any recommendations for any other tabletop RPGs.
How long have we got? That's
well, I mean, like 1 or 2 I'll allow, but yeah, the rules are it can't be a game that you've made, and of course it can't be DnD. But those are your guidelines.
I think so. I've just finished reading Teeth, which is, I can't think it's published by. It's a UK publisher, and it's based on it's the Blades in the Dark system, but it's very different. It's like Victorian Britain, but there is a Vale, the Vale of Duluth, which is it's haunted. No one really knows what happened there, but it's monsters roaming and all sorts. And your characters are on a mission. Well, they're on a mission for the crown to go in and do something in the Vale. They've got a year. If you take longer than a year, you become corrupted and they're not letting you out. And there's quite a few sort of settlements of people who haven't made it out. But you also have a secret agenda. Your group has a secret agenda, which they're trying to deal with as well, which could be like raising a dark god from this Vale or all sorts.
Example.
Yeah. For example, yeah. So I've just finished reading that, and that was absolutely lovely. And it reminded me that I haven't played Blades in the Dark recently, and I do like that system. It's very nice.
Nice. So Teeth, that will be your recommendation for people to check out. Okay, great. That sounds fantastic. Thanks so much for that.
Thank you.
Stu, thanks again for coming on and giving it time to talk about your game. It's great to have you on. And I know you have many other games that you've made as well, so we'll have to have you back on to talk about those at another date. Also, thank you to everyone who's watched and listened. Thank you very much for supporting the show. We'll be back next week with another indie tabletop RPG to share with you. But for now, that's all for this week. Thanks very much. Bye.